The dust never settled in Redemption, Arizona. It hung in the air like unfinished business, coating everything in a fine layer of regret. The town had grown around the railroad tracks like a scab over a wound, ugly but necessary. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their paint peeling under the relentless desert sun, while the smell of horse sweat and whiskey drifted from every doorway. Ayanna Blackhorse stood at the edge of town, her dark eyes scanning the familiar yet changed landscape. 15 years had passed since she'd last seen this place, but the memories burned as fresh as the day they were carved into her soul. She was 8 years old when the soldiers came, when the flames licked at everything she'd ever known, when her grandmother's voice was silenced forever in the chaos. Now 23, Ayanna had traded her childhood braids for a weathered hat that cast shadows across her angular face. Her Apache heritage showed in the proud set of her shoulders and the careful way she moved, like someone who had learned early that survival meant never letting your guard down. The Colt 45 at her hip wasn't for show. The calluses on her hands and the steady way she carried herself spoke of years spent learning to use it. The saloon's bat-wing doors creaked in the afternoon wind, spilling yellow light and raucous laughter onto the dusty street. The Golden Horn read the faded sign above, though most of the gold paint had long since flaked away. Through the grimy windows, she could see the shapes of men hunched over cards and bottles, their faces ruddy with drink and easy living. She recognized none of them, but that didn't matter. She wasn't here for the foot soldiers. "You sure about this, girl?" The voice belonged to Samuel Martinez, the Mexican trader who'd found her half dead in the desert all those years ago. He'd become something like a father to her, though neither of them had ever used that word. His weathered face showed concern as he adjusted the reins of his wagon. "Samuel, you've done enough, more than enough." Ayanna's voice carried the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language, though her words were precise and measured. "This is something I have to finish alone. 15 years is a long time to carry hate, Mija." She turned to look at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made him step back. Not cruelty, but a kind of cold determination that had been forged in loss and tempered by time. "It's not hate anymore, Samuel. It's justice." The old man sighed, knowing there was nothing he could say to change her mind. He'd watched her grow from a traumatized child into this focused young woman, had seen her practice with that gun for hours each day, had listened to her nightmares gradually fade into a quiet, burning purpose. "The man you're looking for, Miller, he's not the same person he was 15 years ago. People change." Ayanna shouldered her pack, checking the weight of the ammunition belt across her chest. "So do I." As Samuel's wagon rolled away in a cloud of dust, Ayanna walked toward the saloon. Each step brought back flashes of memory. Her village by the creek, where her grandmother taught her to weave baskets and identify healing plants. Her father's strong hands showing her how to track deer through the mountains. Her mother's gentle voice singing the old songs as she cooked. And then the fire, always the fire. She pushed through the bat-wing doors, and the noise inside died like someone had thrown a blanket over it. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, taking in the dusty trail clothes, the gun at her hip, and most of all, the unmistakable features that marked her as Apache. The bartender, a heavy-set man with arms like tree trunks, leaned forward on the bar. "We don't serve Indians here, girl. You'd best move along." Ayanna's eyes swept the room, cataloguing faces, looking for the one that haunted her dreams. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the suddenly silent room. "I'm not here to drink." She moved to an empty table in the corner, pulling out a chair so she could sit with her back to the wall and her eyes on the room. The scrape of the chair legs on the wooden floor was the only sound. "I said we don't serve." "Then don't serve me." She settled into the chair, her hand resting casually near her gun. "I'll wait." The bartender's face reddened, but something in her manner made him hesitate. This wasn't some desperate Indian looking for handouts or cheap whiskey. This was someone who'd come here with a purpose, and that purpose radiated from her like heat from a forge. One of the card players, a young man with a peach fuzz beard and nervous eyes, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should get the sheriff. The sheriff's busy." Ayana's eyes never left the room as she spoke. "Besides, I haven't broken any laws, yet." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. These men weren't used to being challenged, especially not by a young Indian woman who looked like she could back up whatever threat she was making. They outnumbered her 20-1, but something about her calm confidence made that advantage feel less secure. The bartender tried once more. "Look, miss, I don't know what you want, but I want to see Captain Robert Miller." The name fell into the silence like a stone into still water. "Tell him Ayana Blackhorse is here to collect a debt." Several of the men exchanged glances. The name Miller meant something to them, though whether fear or respect Ayana couldn't tell. What mattered was that they knew him. "Miller ain't been captain of nothing for 10 years, one of them finally said. "Then what is he now?" The man looked around nervously before answering. "He owns the bank and half the businesses in town, runs the town council too." Ayana nodded slowly. It made sense. The man who'd burned her village for the government's money would naturally gravitate toward more money, more power. Some people were like rivers. They always found their way to the lowest ground. Where? Now hold on. Where? The authority in her voice surprised even her. It was the voice of someone who'd spent years learning to command respect in a world that offered none freely. The voice of someone who'd survived by being harder than the circumstances that tried to break her. "The bank's closed for the day," another man offered reluctantly. "Miller's probably at his house up on Prospect Hill." "Thank you." She stood, leaving a silver dollar on the table despite the bartender's earlier refusal to serve her. As she moved toward the door, the card players and drinkers parted like water, their eyes following her every step. At the doorway she paused and turned back to the room. "When he asks who told him I was coming, and he will ask, tell him it was ghosts." The doors swung shut behind her, leaving 20 men staring at the space where she'd stood, each one wondering if they'd just witnessed the beginning of something they'd rather not see the end of. Outside, the desert wind picked up, stirring the dust into small cyclones that danced down the empty street. Ayana pulled her hat down low and began walking toward the hill where the respectable people lived, where a man could buy himself distance from the ashes of other people's lives. "But some debts," she thought as her boots clicked steadily on the wooden sidewalk, "follow you no matter how far you run." Prospect Hill rose above Redemption like a judgment, its manicured streets and painted houses a stark contrast to the dusty chaos below. Gas lamps lined the walkways, their flickering light casting dancing shadows between the oak trees that someone had planted to make the desert feel more like the civilized East. Robert Miller's house sat at the crest of the hill, a 2-story Victorian with white columns and black shutters that spoke of money and respectability. A wrought-iron fence surrounded the property, more for show than protection. What did a man like Miller have to fear in his own town? Ayana crouched behind a stand of mesquite trees at the property's edge, studying the house as the sun set behind the mountains. Light glowed in the windows, and she could see figures moving inside. Miller's wife, probably, and maybe children. The thought made her pause. She'd spent so many years focused on Miller himself that she'd never considered the people around him, the innocent lives that might be caught in the crossfire of her justice. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Hatred is a fire that burns the holder first, little star. Make sure you know what you're willing to sacrifice to feed the flames. Drilled through the largest window, she saw him. Robert Miller was older now, his hair gone grey at the temples, his face carrying the soft lines of comfortable living. He sat in a leather chair, reading a newspaper, a glass of amber liquid at his elbow. He looked like any other successful businessman, not like the hard-faced cavalry captain who'd ordered the torches 15 years ago. But Ayana's memory was perfect when it came to that face. She'd seen it in her nightmares for years, young and cruel and certain of its own righteousness. The man reading peacefully by lamplight was the same one who'd watched her village burn, who'd ridden away laughing while children screamed for their mothers. "Papa, tell us the story about the Apache again." A child's voice drifted through the open window, clear and excited. Ayana's blood turned to ice as she watched a boy of perhaps 10 climb onto Miller's lap, followed by a younger girl with pigtails. "Not tonight, Thomas. It's time for bed." "Please, Papa, tell us about how you fought the savage Indians and made the territory safe," Miller chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "That was a long time ago, son. Ancient history." "But you were a hero. Mama said you got a medal." Ayana's hand moved instinctively to her gun, but she forced herself to remain still. This wasn't how she'd imagined it. Not with children present, not with Miller looking like somebody's beloved grandfather instead of the monster from her memories. A woman appeared in the doorway, tall and elegant with kind eyes. "Thomas, Sarah, your father's had a long day. Say good night and get ready for bed." "Yes, Mama." The children kissed Miller's cheek and scampered upstairs, their laughter echoing through the house. The woman, Miller's wife, moved to stand behind his chair, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Hard day at the bank?" she asked. "Nothing I can't handle, Margaret. Just the usual, loans and ledgers and men who think money solves everything." "And you don't?" Miller smiled up at his wife, and Ayana was shocked to see genuine affection pass between them. Money solves some things, but the important things, family, love, respect, those you have to earn. "You're a good man, Robert Miller." The words hit Ayana like a physical blow. A good man. This woman saw her husband as a good man, and maybe to her and their children he was. Maybe he'd spent the last 15 years being kind to his family, generous to his community, fair in his business dealings. Maybe he'd changed, grown, become someone different from the soldier who destroyed her world. But that didn't bring back her grandmother. That didn't erase the screams, or heal the scars, or fill the hollow place in her chest where her family used to live. She was so lost in these thoughts that she almost missed the rider approaching the house. A young man on a lathered horse, moving fast and looking back over his shoulder like something was chasing him. He tied his horse to the gate and ran up the front steps, pounding on the door with urgency. Miller appeared quickly, still in his shirt sleeves. "Jimmy, what's wrong?" "Mr. Miller, sir, there's trouble in town. An Apache woman came into the Golden Horn asking for you. She said—" The young man paused, swallowing hard. "She said to tell you Ayana Blackhorse was here to collect a debt." The color drained from Miller's face. The newspaper fell from his hands, and he gripped the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Are you certain? Those exact words?" "Yes, sir. And Mr. Miller, she had a gun. Looked like she knew how to use it too." Miller was quiet for a long moment, staring out into the darkness as if he could see through it to where Ayana waited. When he spoke, his voice was different, older, more tired. "How many people heard her say that name?" "Everyone in the saloon, sir. Maybe 20 men. And where is she now?" "Nobody knows. She left right after, walking toward the hill. Sheriff's organizing a search party, but—" "No." Miller's voice was sharp. "No search party. Tell the sheriff to call off his men. But, sir, tell him it's a personal matter. Something from the old days that needs to be settled between her and me. Jimmy looked confused but nodded. Yes, sir. Anything else? Miller glanced back into the house, where his wife waited in the hallway, with worry creasing her brow. Tell my wife I had to go out. Business that can't wait. He disappeared inside for a moment, returning with a coat and hat. But Ayanna noticed he didn't wear a gun. Whatever Miller was planning, he wasn't planning to fight. After Jimmy rode away, Miller stood on his porch for several minutes, breathing deeply of the cool night air. Finally, he spoke into the darkness. I know you're out there, Ayanna. I've been expecting you for years. Ayanna's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't move. How could he know? I remember a little girl with fierce eyes who wouldn't stop staring at me while her village burned. I remember thinking she looked old beyond her years, like she was memorizing my face. He paused. I was right, wasn't I? Slowly, Ayanna stood and stepped out of the shadows. In the lamplight spilling from the house, she looked like a ghost, pale with dust, her dark clothes making her almost invisible, except for the gleam of metal at her hip. You remember. I remember everything. Miller's voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. I remember the orders I was given, and I remember following them. I remember the look in your grandmother's eyes when she fell, and I remember thinking that someday someone would come for me. And yet you did nothing to prepare. Miller looked down at his hands, then back at her. What was I supposed to prepare for? I can't undo what I did. I can't bring back the dead. All I could do was try to become a better man than the one who rode out of your village that day. Did you succeed? The question hung between them like a blade. Miller considered it seriously, not offering easy answers or empty justifications. I don't know. I've tried to build instead of destroy, to protect instead of harm. I've raised children who've never known war, never seen violence. I've helped this town grow into something peaceful. He paused. But I've never forgotten the price that was paid for that peace. The price my people paid. Yes. Ayanna studied his face in the lamplight, looking for the cruel young captain from her memories. But time had carved different lines around his eyes, had added weight to his shoulders that spoke of responsibility rather than authority. Do you know what happened to me after you burned my village? Miller shook his head, though something in his expression suggested he'd wondered. I spent 3 days walking through the desert. 8 years old, alone, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the taste of smoke in my mouth. I ate cactus fruit and drank my own urine to survive. On the 3rd day, I collapsed. A Mexican trader found me more dead than alive. She paused, watching his face. He could have sold me to slavers, could have left me to die. Instead, he took me in, raised me like his own daughter, taught me to read and write, to shoot and ride, to survive in a world that didn't want me. He was a good man, Miller, better than you or me or anyone else in this story. Where is he now? Dead, killed by bandits 3 years ago while trying to protect a family of settlers. Her voice caught slightly. He died because he was good, because he cared about strangers more than he cared about his own safety. Miller absorbed this, understanding the weight of what she was telling him. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for mine. Your loss? The man I used to be. The certainty I used to have that I was doing the right thing, fighting the good fight. He looked at his house, where his family waited in warmth and safety. I've spent 15 years building a life on the foundation of other people's ashes. Some nights I wonder if that makes me a fraud or a fool. Ayanna felt something she hadn't expected, a flicker of sympathy for the man who destroyed her world. The emotion surprised and angered her. Pretty words won't bring back my grandmother. No, they won't. Nothing will. The honesty in his voice disarmed her. She'd expected denials, excuses, attempts to justify what he'd done. She'd prepared for his defiance or his cowardice, but not for this weary acceptance of guilt. "So, what now?" Miller asked. "You came here for justice. I'm not going to run or hide or fight you. If you believe I deserve to die for what I did, then do what you came to do." Ayana's hand moved to her gun, her fingers wrapping around the familiar grip. This was the moment she'd imagined 1,000 times, Miller at her mercy, finally paying for what he'd taken from her. But looking at him now, she saw not a monster, but a tired man carrying his own weight of regret. Behind him, light glowed in the windows where his children slept safely, where his wife waited for him to come back inside. If she killed him, what would that make her? Justice? Or just another person stealing family from children, leaving ashes where love used to be? "I need time to think," she said finally. Miller nodded. "I'll be here. I won't run, Ayana. I owe you that much." As she melted back into the shadows, Ayana heard him go inside, heard his wife's worried voice asking questions she couldn't make out. But she also heard something else, the sound of children's laughter drifting from an upstairs window, innocent and pure and fragile as everything she'd once lost. The weight of the gun at her hip felt heavier than ever. Dawn came slowly to redemption, the desert sky bleeding from black to purple to gold, while the town still slept. Ayana sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, her back against a twisted Joshua tree, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of fire. She hadn't slept. Instead, she'd spent the night walking the empty streets, past the church where Miller probably prayed on Sundays, past the school where his children learned their letters, past the bank where he counted money earned on the backs of conquest. Every step had been a question she couldn't answer. What did justice look like when the guilty had built their redemption on someone else's graves? The sound of approaching footsteps made her hand drift toward her gun, but she relaxed when she saw the familiar figure climbing the rocky slope. Samuel Martinez moved slowly, his weathered face creased with concern, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a cloth bundle that smelled like fresh bread. "Thought I might find you here," he said, settling down beside her with a grunt. "You always did like high places when you needed to think." Ayana accepted the coffee gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "I thought you left town." "I got 3 miles down the road before I turned around. Couldn't leave you to face this alone." Samuel unwrapped the bundle, revealing warm tortillas and strips of dried meat. "Besides, somebody needs to make sure you eat something besides your own anger." Ayana and Samuel share a quiet moment after she finds the man responsible for destroying her village. She reveals he now lives a peaceful life with a family, which challenges her long-held desire for revenge. Conflicted, Ayana questions whether justice is still justice when blurred by time and change. Samuel listens, then offers her a piece of the past, her grandmother's medicine pouch recovered from the ashes years ago. The gesture reminds Ayana that even in destruction, something sacred can survive. Story summary. Ayana's choice. Ayana received her grandmother's fire-scarred leather pouch, still carrying the scent of sage and sweetgrass, along with healing stones, sacred seeds, and a turquoise fragment. As she clutched it to her chest, she remembered her grandmother's stories about ancestral spirits and their guidance toward wisdom. When asked what her grandmother would say about her situation, Ayana reflected on the contradictory wisdom she'd inherited, that revenge consumes everything it touches, and true strength comes from refusing to let enemies destroy you. Yet justice delayed is justice denied, and some wrongs demand answers. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching riders, Sheriff Harrison and 2 deputies. The sheriff respectfully requested to speak with Ayanna, explaining that Miller had sent word about their unfinished business and asked that they be allowed to settle it without interference. Harrison revealed his own past in the Indian Wars, acknowledging how orders from Washington led them to believe they were civilizing the frontier. He'd learned that civilization built on bones doesn't endure, suggesting Miller might have reached the same understanding. When Ayanna asked about the consequences if she chose violence, Harrison made her consider Miller's children, Thomas and Sarah, and whether her actions would plant new seeds of hatred in them. The sheriff described Miller's transformation over 10 years in redemption, a fair, honest man who'd helped establish the orphanage, funded the town's well, and supported the church and school. Though admitting Miller had flaws and could be unforgiving in business, Harrison emphasized he wasn't the same man who'd ridden with Custer's cavalry. Harrison challenged Ayanna to consider her own transformation from the scared child who'd walked out of the desert 15 years ago. This truth struck her deeply. She had changed, becoming harder, stronger, more dangerous through loss and hardship. If she and Samuel could evolve, perhaps Miller too could transform from killer to builder. Yet evolution didn't erase the past or resurrect the dead. Ayanna decided she needed to see Miller again, alone this time. Harrison informed her that Miller was waiting at the bank until sunset. After the lawmen departed, Samuel offered to accompany her, but she insisted on going alone. Samuel embraced her as he had during her childhood nightmares, reminding her that she was more than her pain. She was her grandmother's granddaughter, carrying wisdom and love, and shouldn't let the past's ashes burn away the woman she'd become. Ayanna walked toward town with her grandmother's medicine pouch against her heart and 15 years of weight on her shoulders, while behind her the Joshua tree stood like a twisted cross against the morning sky, its arms raised in perpetual supplication or surrender. Ayanna arrived at the Redemption Bank, where she found Miller alone in his office, nervously handling a small horse carved from white stone, a gift from his son. The object stirred painful memories in Ayanna, reminding her of a turtle she had carved for her own father. Miller, visibly aged by tension, admitted he wasn't sure she would come. When Ayanna asked about the confrontation 15 years ago, he began recounting the events in painful detail. He revealed that he was a young 22-year-old officer, fresh from West Point, who believed he was bringing civilization to the wilderness when he received orders to relocate Ayanna's band to a reservation. The crucial moment of their conversation came when Miller described his encounter with Ayanna's grandmother. During the attack, the elderly Apache woman didn't flee, but positioned herself courageously in front of her lodge. When a soldier raised his rifle to shoot her, Miller stopped him and approached the woman. The grandmother, looking directly into his eyes without fear, spoke in Apache while pointing behind her, where Ayanna was hiding behind a water barrel. Miller learned later through a scout that the grandmother had said, "This child will remember your face, white soldier. Someday she will come for you, and you will pay for what you have stolen." When Ayanna asked why he didn't stop the massacre after this encounter, Miller confessed he was a coward, more afraid of disobeying orders than doing the wrong thing. The guilt haunted him for months afterward, eventually leading him to resign his commission and move west to start over. Miller had spent 15 years trying to build something good in redemption, but always knew it was elaborate penance for an unforgivable act. During their conversation, Ayanna reflected on the wisdom her wounds had taught her, that hatred poisons the holder more than the target, that justice without mercy is just another form of cruelty, and that the dead don't rest easier when more bodies are added to their count. The climactic moment arrived when Ayanna drew her gun and placed it on the desk between them, declaring she had chosen to be her grandmother's granddaughter. However, instead of shooting Miller, she explained this was not forgiveness, but an end to the cycle of violence. She realized that killing him would dishonor her grandmother's sacrifice by becoming the very thing the old woman died trying to save her from. Miller then presented Ayanna with a deed to 300 acres of fertile land by Canyon Creek, not as payment, but as acknowledgement of what was stolen from her people. His condition was that she build a school where Apache children could learn their own language and customs alongside English, preserving their history while preparing them for the future. Ayanna accepted, but added her own conditions: a memorial with stone markers bearing the names of all who died that day in both Apache and English, and that Miller tell his children the truth about his past, not sanitized heroic tales, but the real story of what it cost and why it was wrong. Their conversation was interrupted by Miller's worried family. Through an honest exchange with his young son Thomas, who asked if she had come to hurt his father, Ayanna explained she had come angry, but learned that revenge wouldn't heal her pain, just as breaking someone's toy in return doesn't fix your own broken toy. After the family left, Miller and Ayanna reached their final understanding. This wouldn't make them friends or heal all wounds, but it would stop the bleeding. Ayanna realized that sometimes justice simply means choosing to stop the bleeding before everyone dies from their wounds. As Ayanna left redemption with Samuel, she carried both her grandmother's medicine pouch and the deed to the land, past and future resting together. She had transformed her destructive anger into something that could nurture growth, a school where children could learn they are more than the worst things done to them. The chapter concluded with Ayanna understanding that her grandmother would have approved of this alchemy, turning the fire of anger from a force of destruction into light that could guide other lost children home. The most radical act, she realized, was not destroying but refusing to destroy, choosing to walk away from a fight she had every right to finish.